Good morning. All right, it's afternoon. You know what? I even wrote it in my notes. I practiced. Not so well. Prior proper planning prevents poor performance. Before I begin on my sermon, there's two things I just want to make attention to. I brought the FOI coin jar back. We haven't had it for about a year because when we first came here to the Marriott, I left it, and thankfully somebody grabbed it. So I got nervous about leaving it, and I haven't brought it, but we shouldn't forget our brethren in Africa that certainly need those scholarships. So any loose coins you have, or if you'd like to make a silent offering and put some bills in there, it'll be well accepted. The other thing before I begin is I owe Mr. McTiernan an apology, because I look out and I see Mr. Richard Hoy sitting over here, local elder from, I think, the Dallas area, or Texas anyhow, and I think, how did I not get out of this speaking assignment? I knew he was coming, brethren, I knew he was coming. How did it not strike me? And Mr. McTiernan has taught me so well over the years, and being the head of the tribe of Dan here in this congregation, and I being of the tribe of Dan, I know I have let you down, Mr. McTiernan, and I will study and do better in the future, I assure you. Last night, we celebrated the Passover, as we all know, which is a memorial of the commitment both our father and our elder brother have to us, and our recommitment to them. As Mr. Hafley pointed out in his sermon 2 weeks ago, the Corinthians took Passover too lightly, not comprehending the deep commitment both the Father and the Son have put in place, and Passover picturing their plan to bring all mankind into the family of God. It was also last night that we read a portion of the Scriptures which has always fascinated me, Christ's last prayer, and more specifically, the portion of that prayer that is specific to you and me. Think about it. At this point, at that night, only he and the Father understood what was really about to take place. And even though he knew he would be reunited with the Father in I wouldn't call them short days because he had some very difficult days ahead of him, but in 3 to 4 days, if you count the day that he was tortured, he would be reestablished to his place of authority in heaven. But he took the time to speak to his Father, our Father, about us, so that we would know his thoughts all these years later. He could have handled it when he got back to the third heaven and spoke to the Father, but instead he left it as a public message for us. And I'd like to take a look at that this morning again. We read it last night. I wanted to read a portion of it. If you'll turn to John chapter 17, I'd like to look at it in a little different light this afternoon. I almost did it again, this afternoon. John 17, verse 20 through 26. This is the portion of the prayer that he prays for us to the Father. He says, I do not pray for these alone, pointing out those that were in the room, but also those who will believe in me through their word. That's you and me, brethren. That they may be one as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they may also be one in us, that the world may believe that you sent me. And the glory which you gave me, I have given them, and that they may be one as we are one. I in them, and you in me, that they may be perfect in one, that the world may know that you have sent me and have loved them as you have loved me. Father, I desire that they also whom you gave me may be with me where I am, that they may behold my glory which you have given me. For you loved me before the foundation of the world. O righteous Father, the world has not known you, but I have known you, and these have known that you sent me. And I have declared to them your name, and will declare it, that the love with which you love me be in them and I in them. It is a remarkable prayer when you think about it in its intensity that he had for us, not just for those that were in the room that he had been praying more directly for prior to that portion of the prayer. He took the time so that his voice could be recorded for you and I, that we would have the faith to hold fast, even though, unlike those in the room with Christ, we would live our lives without physically knowing Jesus Christ the way they did. In a way, our relationship with the Father and the Son is very special insomuch as it requires the faith that is described in Hebrews 11, verse 1. Hebrews 11 verse 1 says, Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. While we have seen the evidence of God in our faith was not built as theirs was initially by walking with Jesus Christ for 3.5 years. Consider John 21 verse 25. John 21 verse 25, the last verse of the book of John. John says a really remarkable thing. He said, Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that were written. We have, depending on the way you count the miracles of Jesus Christ in the New Testament, 37 miracles. Now, they can be more because there may have been 9 people when something was happening. But in general, by general rule, there's a list of 37. What did they see beyond that the whole world could not hold the books? Now, I recognize that that is somewhat hyperbole, but still, there must have been so much more. Imagine 3.5 years that they walked with Jesus Christ, what they must have seen, as Mr. Walker pointed out last night about the healing aspect of the Passover, Christ healing all those sick and ill people. Christ knew we would have a different experience than those who were called to be the original disciples, and of those, some later to be apostles. And he took the time to record for us his personal prayer to the Father concerning his love for us. You might recall a year or so back, I received a letter out of nowhere that my mother had written in 1968 to her parents after she had been baptized. The letter was quite remarkable, the joy of the amazement of the plan of God as it had been opened into her mind. And here I was reading it some 50-plus years later. It was so encouraging to me. This beautiful prayer of Jesus Christ is the same to me, and I'm sure it is to you. With all that was before him, he took the time to have his thoughts recorded, so that this, almost 2,000 years later, we could know his love for us. What were those thoughts? Well, I'm sure they were multifaceted, but at their core, he was asking the Father to help us in our unbelief through faith. I'd like to go back and just take a look at 4 verses of that prayer that we read and comb out this idea that he is asking that we have faith. John 17, verse 20, again, he said, I do not pray for these alone, but also for those who will believe in me through their word. That requires faith, doesn't it? We have to believe that Jesus Christ is through the words of others. That they all may be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that you sent me. So through our unity with one another and our unity with Jesus Christ and our faith, our belief that that is what is required, others will believe in Jesus Christ. That is faith. Verse 22, and the glory which you gave me I have given them, that they may be one just as we are one, I and them and you and me, that they may be made perfect in one, and that the world may know that you have sent me. That the world may know that you have sent me. That's faith through action. The way we live our lives, which we will see later, the way that we behave, the way those see us, points others back to God the Father and Jesus Christ. Again, Hebrews 11, verse 1, now faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. As Christ prayed, let them show the world who the Father and the Son are through their faith. Today, this day, the day after Passover, is the day that the Israelites walked out of Egypt. They kept Passover as we did last night. They walked out this evening, which is why we have the night to be observed, as Mr. Hafley pointed out in his sermon 2 weeks ago. They walked out, as it is said in Psalm 136, verse 12, with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. But I would say they also walked out lacking a little faith. It wasn't long before they wanted to return. Today, I'd like to take a look at this concept of faith, what it is, how we can misapply it, and how important it is that we continue to build faith in our life. After all, what is not used can be lost. So what is faith? We've already read the definition in Hebrews 11. But what I want to know is, what is faith to you? When you think of faith and your faith in God the Father, Jesus Christ, and the commitment we've made, what is that faith? I will give you my thoughts, and you can see if you see any similarities in them. I'm going to ask you a couple questions that you can answer to yourself, which require faith. And I want you to think about them like a funnel, starting wide at the top and narrowing. When we train younger salespeople, we always say that a sales presentation is to work just that way. You start with broad concepts, and as you get affirmative answers, you keep moving in to the point they say, I want to buy tortillas from Chuck. And that's the way it works. It's pretty simple, actually, but it is complex to do. So I'm going to ask you the question, starting with the broadest. Do you believe there is a God? And let's be honest, that takes faith. Do you believe there is a Son separate and distinct from the Father? That's a little different than the way the world, many people that believe in God, would say they don't believe that. Do you believe that they have a plan for all mankind? Number 4, do you believe Christ, formerly the Word of God, came in the flesh and gave his life for all mankind? All mankind, all mankind, so they can have an opportunity for salvation. These are not small questions. They seem like they're pretty easy for those of us here who have made this commitment. But with each affirmative answer, they require a deeper level of faith and belief in God as the funnel narrows to the bottom. Now I'll ask you a 5th question. If you've answered all of the above in the affirmative, are you willing to obey God where he leads, even if it means the loss of what you see before you? Could be money, could be family, friends, career, children, etc. We all, those of us that were here at Passover last night or kept Passover last night and have been baptized, have answered that in the affirmative. We said yes. Not everyone gets to that exact point. Let's turn over to Mark chapter 10. Christ left us this incredible story of something that happened on one of his days in his ministry. Mark 10, verse 17 through 22. It says, Now he, Jesus Christ, was going out on the road, and one came running, knelt before him and asked, Good teacher, what should I do that I might inherit eternal life? So Jesus said to him, Why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is God. You know the commandments, and then he rattles a bunch of them off. Do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not defraud, honor your father and mother. And he answered him, Teacher, all these things I have done from my youth. Then this very interesting line here in verse 21. Then Jesus, looking at him, loved him. He felt deep compassion for this young man and said to him, One thing you lack. Go your way and sell everything you have and give it to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come and take up the cross and follow me. But he was sad, this young man, at that word, and went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. So he couldn't answer the 5th question in the affirmative. He didn't have that level of faith to step out and to follow Jesus Christ. He certainly had the substance of things hoped for. He wanted eternal life. He hoped for eternal life. He wanted that. But he could not fully trust the evidence of things not seen. At baptism, we said yes, unlike this young man. But is that the end of the matter for us? Last night, we recommitted, but is it once saved, always saved, as they say? I don't think so. In fact, I know it's not. Those of us in the room who can remember 1995 and the years leading up to it, and I know that for my children and many, they weren't either just born or weren't even alive yet, and there are people that have come into the church since that don't remember these years. But it is important for us to talk about them from time to time, because this was a test of faith that came upon the church where these questions seemed to be very hard to answer for people. We all know what happened in 1995. Now, again, many saw it beforehand, but there was a tipping point in 1995. There was a sermon given that basically nailed the law to the cross, if you will. And overnight, tens of thousands of people who answered all the questions we answered in the affirmative a few minutes ago walked away. Within hours, they were ordering pepperoni pizza. They were no longer obeying the Sabbath and who knows what other laws. They just faded away. And yet, they had the faith. They had answered all those questions in the affirmative. Why did that happen? Well, at its core, they lacked the faith once delivered. Faith is a gift from God, and they lacked it. Let's go over to Jude verse 3. Jude verse 3, and take a look at this concept. Jude verse 3, it says, "Beloved, while I was very diligent to write to you concerning our common salvation, I found it necessary to write to you, exhorting you to contend earnestly for what? For the faith which was once for all delivered to the saints." We must contend for our faith. It isn't a stagnant thing. Once given, we always have it. It's always here. It's more like Jacob in the tent wrestling with Jesus Christ. We must wrestle to hold on to the faith that God has given us in him. Faith is a gift from God, which through his Holy Spirit we can understand the truth. But more importantly, like the parable of the talents, it is something once given we must work to increase through prayer and personal diligence every day of our lives. If you think about it like weightlifting, faith is the spiritual protein without which we cannot support spiritual muscle. We need that spiritual muscle in the days of heavy spiritual lifting, when these trials come upon us, as they did to the whole church in the 90s and can come on us individually from time to time. Faith is the belief that God is and the confidence that he is with us no matter what is before us. And therefore, we live our lives in a way that pleases him. So I'd like now to take a look at what, maybe this is worded poorly, but not what faith is not, but how sometimes we misapply faith to our actions in our lives. Everyone knows this scripture, but let's turn to Romans 14, verse 23. As it relates to faith, I say, you'll recognize it immediately. Romans 14, verse 23, in the latter part, it says, "For whatever is not from faith is sin." But that's not totally clear. What Paul's talking about here are brothers who are convicted about eating clean meats versus others that are convicted to be vegetarian, specifically because the meats may have been offered to idols somewhere in the past and now are being sold in the market. And he says, do not contend over this, because what they are doing, they're doing in faith. They believed that if they ate that meat and it had been offered, that would be a sin. So to them it was a sin, Paul was pointing out. And while that's easy for us to see these 2,000 years later, we can easily get caught up in the same thinking pattern. Eating out on the Sabbath is an example where we've seen it happen over time in the church. The church has ruled that eating out on the Sabbath in this day and age, because of the world we live in, is fine. But somebody else might think, well, I don't want to do that, which is also fine. We don't want to contend with them. We wouldn't invite them to join us at a restaurant. We'd invite them to join us at our home so that we wouldn't offend them. That's the principle Paul is calling out. Today, historically, though, in the modern era of the church, we probably misapply faith more in discerning faith as it manifests not itself in food and drink, but in medical treatment. Whether or not we choose to do what we choose to do represents our faith or our lack of faith. Yesterday was the 10th anniversary of the day that Deneen was diagnosed with breast cancer. And we have very much appreciated throughout the years all the prayers and the support we got here locally and from brethren around the country while we went through that trial. Out of nowhere, in an instant, we were faced with a myriad of decisions which had the potential of coming into conflict with what we could have wrongly conceived or perceived as faith and trusting in God. Many times we evaluate our choices measuring them up against faith or our belief in what it is that God wants us to do. Let's take a look at 1 Peter 5. 1 Peter 5. And to be clear, this can manifest itself in anything. I happen just to be using the medical because it's relevant to us at top of mind now, 10 years later. 1 Peter 5, verse 6 through 10. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your cares upon him, for he cares for you. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking who he may devour. Resist him steadfast in faith, knowing that the same sufferings experienced by your brotherhood in the world, but may the God of the grace, who calls us to his eternal glory by Christ Jesus, after you have suffered a while, perfect, establish, strengthen, and settle you. We see here in this passage that we should cast our cares on God. And indeed, that is so. That is exactly what we should do, and that should be our first step. But that does not preclude us from taking any physical steps if that's what we choose to do. There's two actions here, casting our cares on God and seeking, in this case, this discussion, medical help. They're not incongruous at all, any more than praying for your daily bread and going out and harvesting the wheat to make it. To be clear, whether one seeks medical help or doesn't is a personal matter. I'm not speaking about that at all. What I'm talking about here today is how we can misapply and get confused ourselves about what it is we want to do and whether or not we're pleasing God in doing it. The question is not whether doing something is an act of faith. Faith is not wrapped up in the decisions we make. Faith is an overriding deep belief in whatever the outcome of the decisions we make, it is in God's hands. We have cast our cares upon him already. Put another way, faith is not an offensive step. We've cast our cares, we've taken this step, and that's it. Faith is a defensive step. Paul puts it that way in Ephesians 6, verse 16. Ephesians 6, verse 16. Paul says, above all, take the shield. A shield is a defensive weapon, not an offensive weapon. Take the shield of faith with which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one. Faith is not necessarily in our personal choices. Vegetarianism versus eating meat, Eastern medicine versus Western medicine, natural path versus nothing at all. It is not in any of those. It is in the overriding shield we hold up when faced with a trial that allows us to make decisions in prayerful consultation with God and deflect the fiery darts of doubt being shot at us by our enemy. So faith is not in the decision we make necessarily. It is the substance of the belief that the things that we are doing, as long as we are doing them according to God's will, that God is with us and will direct our steps. So how important is it that we build faith in our life and continue to build faith in our lives? Turn to Hebrews 11, verse 6. Hebrews 11 and verse 6. It says, without faith it is impossible to please him, for he who comes to God must believe that God is, and that God is the rewarder of those who diligently seek him. It is very clear to me that based on this scripture, faith is critical to our salvation. So if it's so important and we understand what it is, how do we measure our progress? How do we know whether we have the faith required or the faith that God desires in us? Is there a formula? Is there a way to calculate how we are doing with our faith so we don't end up in a 1995 and not know what to do? Well, there is. God left us a formula in James chapter 2. James chapter 2, verses 14 through 26 is the formula. Let's read through that. What does it profit, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? The concept of once saved, always saved. If you're not doing something with it, do you really have it? Can faith save him, he says? If a brother or a sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, depart in peace, be ye warmed and filled, but you do not give them the things which are needed for their body, what does it profit? Thus also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. But someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe that there is one God. You do well. Even the demons believe and tremble. But do you want to know, O foolish man, that faith without works is dead? And then he defines it for us in two examples of what he's talking about. First is the example of Abraham. Was not Abraham, our father, justified by works when he offered Isaac his son on the altar? Do you see that faith was working together with works? He believed God. When God told him to go do it, he did it. And by the works, faith was made perfect. And the scripture was fulfilled, which says, Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness. And he was called the friend of God. You see that a man is justified by works and not by faith only. Likewise, we have this second example. Rahab the harlot also justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out another way. For the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works, without some personal representation that God is working in our lives, that what we believe in God, we believe these things are motivating us to change our lives. That's the works he's talking about, that we're going to follow God before we do anything else. He says is death. It is not once saved, always saved. There is a reason Christian theologians dislike the book of James and call it the epistle of straw, because they want to believe that we are not required to manifest Jesus Christ in our lives by becoming as he is. No, that's problematic. All they want to do is accept him. The works in our lives described here in the book of James are really twofold, and I'd like to explore that with you just for a minute. First, the most obvious we read are what we do publicly, that we obey God, that we keep the Sabbath, that we're doing these things each week, that we were here at Passover, we're keeping the days of unleavened bread, we're tithing. The things that we're doing, others see and should manifest to them our faith and our love in God. Remember what Christ said in his prayer about us to the Father? He wanted the people to believe in me, in Jesus Christ, through their words. That's their actions, what they were saying. He further said that the world may know that the Father sent him, that there was authority, and that was going to come through our actions, and that the world may know that you have sent me and believed that you sent me. That's a pretty high bar for us all, that the world should come to believe through our faith, our obedience in God, which is our works, which is turned and driven by our actions, that they will turn and see God. There is a second element here in the book of James, too, about our works, and that's our spiritual works, our relationship with God the Father and Jesus Christ. Our spiritual works must include prayer, fasting, and Bible study. Consider again verses 19 and 20 of that same scriptures we read in the book of James. It says, and I'll put myself in here, Chuck, you believe that there is one God. You do well. Hey, even the demons believe that, and they tremble. But do you want to know something, oh foolish Irishman? That faith without spiritual relationship that the demons do not have with God the Father and Jesus Christ, spiritual works, is dead. What does Christ tell us about our need to have a relationship with the Father through prayer and how it relates to our building faith? Let's go back to Luke chapter 18. Luke 18. And he left us this parable, Jesus Christ, in verses 1 through 8. He said, then Christ, speaking a parable to them, that men always ought to pray and not lose heart or not lose faith, even if our prayers are not immediately answered, even if we don't have those answers directly before us, saying that there was in a certain city a judge who did not fear God nor regard man. Now there was a widow in that city, and she came to him, saying, get justice for me from my adversary. And he would not for a while, but afterwards he said to himself, Though I don't fear God nor regard man, this widow troubles me, and I will avenge her, lest she continually comes and she wearies me, coming and wearies me. Then God said something about this parable. He said, the Lord said, hear what the unjust judge said. And shall God not avenge his own elect who cry out day and night to him, though he bears long with them, though it may take a while for these answers? That requires faith, that we keep going forward even when the answer is not there. And Christ reassures us about something. He says, I tell you that he will avenge them speedily. And then there's this sentence that's somewhat disturbing. It says, nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he really find faith on earth? Will he find us, brethren, so doing, dedicated to building faith in our lives? Consider for a minute that we are living in the end times. We don't know when Christ will return, but it does seem that things are accelerating at rates that we would have never, ever contemplated. The Senate just appointed a transgender person to a cabinet-level position in the United States. If I had told you that 5 years ago, you would have said I was crazy. Who knows where this is all leading? Well, I think we do know where this is all leading, to the Great Tribulation. Christ is speaking to this generation. When I return, that's the generation that's going to be alive. I believe there are people in this room who will be alive when Jesus Christ returns. Think again about that funnel. So we can say we believe in God and we believe that Jesus Christ is separate but part of the family, and we can narrow, but if we don't narrow all the way down and we're not building faith, if faith is not part of who we are, if our actions don't represent those beliefs, we're going to be in trouble when Jesus Christ comes. And that's what he's asking. Will I really find that person who is still striving amongst all this noise and chaos that's going on in the world? We must keep our shield of faith up, which takes strength. That strength to hold that shield only comes from one place, the power through God's Holy Spirit. When we unplug from that power by not continuing in prayer, Bible study, and occasional fasting, becoming distracted by the things of this world, and they certainly are distracting, our shields will lower. And like Moses' arms, the enemy, when his arms lowered, the enemy advanced. So how important is it that we continue developing faith? I would propose to you that faith is the secret sauce of our salvation. It is everything. As the scripture says, without it, we cannot please God. As I said in the introduction, today was the day the Israelites were preparing to leave Egypt and begin a new life with God, who would perform such mighty miracles in their presence and was to be their king. And yet, it only took 7 days before their faith faltered at the Red Sea. In fairness, they did not have God's Holy Spirit. But even so, they acted in a groupthink mentality, never learning how to defend their own faith individually, building the spiritual muscle to lift their shield of faith to protect themselves from the fiery darts of doubt that their enemies, both foreign and domestic, were shooting at them. They had enemies in their own camp, doubters in their own camp stirring things up, and they had the Egyptians on their heels. Consider the sermon that Mr. Walker gave a month ago. There are those that we've known personally that have been in the ministry of Jesus Christ that are proposing such unbelievable things that Jesus Christ was a created being. People we might trust. It is domestic terrorism. We have to have the faith that we know what we know and we're living the way we live. As we sit here today, we see the storm clouds gathering across our nation's culture, and for that matter, the world at large. We must not depend on others to protect us with their shields. The shield is only big enough to protect one. But we must prepare now to be ready to stand against, as we have seen in the past, the enemies, both foreign and domestic. As we continue in our self-evaluation this time of year, let each of us examine our faith to ensure that we are building it, to run it through that formula, to know that we are in a good place, that we can deflect the enemy doubts, arrows of doubt.